How crazy is it that we're seeing one of the best years in gaming ever? 2023 has just been insane when it comes to the cadence of high quality titles and like masterpieces we've seen. And yet we're seeing developers suffer some of the worst treatment and layoffs we have ever seen. There's this website called videogamelayoffs.com that is tracking all of the layoffs that have been reported. And look at this list. This is just 2023, by the way. Look at this list. Look at the studios here, the parent companies here, the numbers affected. And you can see this is thousands and thousands of employees. Unity Technologies, 300 people laid off in January. And then they laid off a bunch more later on, 600 more in May of 2023. Now, plenty of major companies are listed here. We're going to focus a lot on Bungie today because that's kind of been the big talk. Around 100 employees were recently laid off. But before we get to that, just to give you an idea, aside from this extensive list right here of the kind of layoffs we've seen this year, right here we have Brett Robbins from Ascendant Studio, the developers of Immortals of Avium, that game that really fell off the radar from EA. He tweeted that 45% of the team, about 45% of their team were laid off because the game just didn't do so hot. And then beyond that, we have Epic Games here, from whom we saw one of the biggest layoffs. Epic Games cuts around 830 jobs, according to the September 28th, 2023 report from The Verge. Earlier that month, Naughty Dog, the developers of The Last of Us, cut quite a good amount of developers, and Sony in general has been on a spending cut spree, which is a contributor to what's happening to Bungie, which is now a PlayStation and Sony subsidiary. Telltale Games recently fired most of their employees, which is essentially just history repeating itself, as PC Gamer reported here. This happened not long ago. We saw the downfall of Telltale Games. We thought maybe they were back on the rise, but once again, we're seeing just mass layoffs that may lead to Telltale going back to yet another downfall. Also in early October, CD Projekt Red developers unionized after a third round of layoffs at the company within the course of 3 months. The estimated number of jobs that have been lost in the games industry in 2023 alone is currently sitting at over 6,100 gaming jobs that have reportedly been cut in 2023, and that number will likely only go higher before year's end. There are plenty of articles right now highlighting how 2023 has been a brutal year for game developers. This article from Axios highlights numerous occurrences on that front. Same thing goes for this gamesindustry.biz article titled "Over 6,000 Games Industry Jobs Lost in 2023 So Far," highlighting the numerous events, game studios, and companies throughout this year that all tie into the mass job losses we have seen within this industry that is thriving, and yet it's the developers who make these games possible who are the ones that are suffering. And yes, this is not necessarily just a games industry thing. The technology sector across the board has been impacted. We're seeing mass layoffs across the board, but it doesn't change the fact that things don't have to be this way. Companies are just choosing to operate this way because they're choosing profits over the talent and the people who they call family, and say all these empty words about how valuable they are, but at the end of the day, they're expendable tools. So with that bird's eye view out of the way, let's now zoom in to Bungie, who back in February of 2022, after Sony and PlayStation acquired them, assured employees that the Sony deal will not result in layoffs and restructuring. Companies' developers fear losing independence, but express cautious optimism after acquisition. In fact, there was such a commitment to ensuring that employees wouldn't get laid off that Sony spent $1.2 billion to make sure Bungie employees don't leave. Well, this did not age very well. Aside from the fact that community sentiment surrounding the game is the lowest it's ever been, things like this situation didn't help PR surrounding Bungie. Here's a headline from IGN. Former Bungie HR manager is suing for wrongful termination after she reported potential racial bias. She alleges her recommendations for sensitivity training were met with hostility and denial. So she reported some shady goings-ons at the company. The HR manager could not do her job and was fired for doing her job. This was reported on October 5th, 2023. Beyond that, we would see Bungie remove job listings, clear signs that they were going to engage in hiring freezes. So this right here is a report from Destiny Bulletin. Looks like Bungie has removed over 40 open job positions from its career website. Previously, there were around 75 open positions, but now there are only 19. And then the big hitter is that and this is a report from Jason Schreier, though many outlets have been reporting on this. Destiny 2 developer Bungie is the latest PlayStation studio to have layoffs. Full scope isn't clear yet. It did eventually become clear. Around 100 employees, or roughly 8% of Bungie, were laid off. But CEO Pete Parsons emailed the company this morning to say they'll be having a team meeting today to talk about some news today coming out of Bungie, as staff are informed. The communication surrounding this and the way laid off employees were treated, the whole process of this particular layoff was just, a travesty. We'll get to that in a bit. But among the professions that were affected at Bungie include community, social, marketing, publishing, art, QA, support, legal, HR, and production. On social media, we've been seeing plenty of now former Bungie employees tweeting out about how they've been laid off and they're looking for new employment. This right here is Liana Rupert, formerly Game Informer, who eventually became a community manager for Bungie for Destiny 2. She confirmed that my heart is breaking for all affected and that she is now looking for opportunities, as she was among those laid off. And, she was expressing anxiety before that about how, she was invited to a meeting and panicking that this might be the one where, she loses everything. And she expressed just how terrified she is of losing their house and, just all the awful elements that come with losing a job like this with such little warning, just such a huge carpet pull. Here is Twitter user TimoneX25, community manager or former community manager for Destiny. He too put it out there that he was among those who've been laid off. Sadly, I have to say that I'm not staying at Bungie. And yeah, we're hearing a lot from community managers because they have a social media presence, but no doubt plenty of employees who aren't as active on social media are not being heard as prominently. So here's Cosmo. He was global community lead at Bungie. Today is the worst day at Bungie by far. Absolutely gutted to lose so many talented and amazing teammates. This is kind of what's been going on at Bungie. A lot of just outpour of just sadness and frustration from a management team that has done such a piss poor job. Here's DMG04, who is now the principal community manager at Riot Games for Valorant, expressing his frustrations, getting texts from friends impacted by layoffs this morning. It is frustrating, infuriating even, to continue seeing people who strap in to do good work losing their financial security due to poor management. The continued echoes of poor decisions made that feel avoidable. In a few of these cases, knowing how much effort these folks put in during incredibly difficult development and sentiment times puts a sour taste in the mouth. And later in the video, we will be discussing how developers tried to warn leadership about ways that they need to improve Destiny 2. That feedback went ignored. Destiny 2 as a game suffered, and the ones who are paying for it are the developers who warned the leaders. It's the leadership who failed the game and the community and the development team. And yet it's the developers who suffer the consequences. This is seriously fucked. From community outlets like Destiny Bulletin, we've been seeing tweets like these. At a loss for words right now, Bungie is destroying the heart and soul of the Destiny franchise. Plenty of people seem to be in agreement. Now, current CEO of Bungie, Pete Parsons, did come out to make a statement that you can see right here. It's getting ratio to hell and back because his condolences come off as completely hollow, especially when we take a look at the way Bungie dealt with the situation. I'll get to that in a bit. In the meantime, though, here's what Pete Parsons said. Today is a sad day at Bungie as we say goodbye to colleagues who have all made a significant impact on our studio. As a man who's keeping his cushy job after laying off these employees in the worst way possible, he has no right to talk about what a sad day this is. This man probably can't even begin to understand what a sad day this is. So yeah, plenty of headlines have been around the situation, like Video Games Chronicles article that reads, Bungie is the latest PlayStation studio to be hit with layoffs. We got some updates here, CEO Parsons' statement, and then another update where Bungie has reportedly delayed Destiny 2's upcoming expansion, The Final Shape, as well as its next full game, Marathon. This is information that comes from Jason Schreier, who reported via Bloomberg that Sony's Bungie game unit cut staff following delayed titles. And scrolling down, we can see some specifics about these delays. So for the expansion, The Final Shape, it was delayed from February to June, pushing it out of Sony Group Corp's current fiscal year. And then we have their upcoming game, Marathon, which is now slipped into 2025. So these are pretty substantial delays. So yeah, the ground beneath Bungie is sort of crumbling right now. Beyond these mass layoffs, their projects have been negatively impacted. And then here is one shocking bit that it just absolutely makes no sense for the community. Among those who were laid off was none other than Michael Salvatore, who is the composer of Destiny 2. Say what you want about Destiny 2, but one area where that game is not missed is its music. And Michael Salvatore is obviously a huge contributor to that. Now, there's some debate as to whether this was a voluntary thing on the part of Michael, or whether he was actually laid off, or whether this was, a forced retirement, if you will. Whatever the case, he's gone from Bungie, and it just, and the timing of it definitely doesn't help the optics surrounding this. You can see right here the amount of love that people had for Michael Salvatore, given how viral tweets surrounding his layoff is going, how baffled people are, how upset and saddened people are by his departure, given his immense contributions to what Destiny 2 is in terms of its vibe and its tone through the music. And so plenty of headlines surrounding this. Veteran Bungie composer Michael Salvatore reportedly departs amid layoffs. His credits include multiple Halo and Destiny releases, including 2001's Combat Evolved. Michael's been at Bungie for a whopping 25 years and was such an influential figure in the music of its IPs, and yet he was not safe from layoffs. What the hell? Michael being laid off was all but further confirmed when Michael Salvatore decided to remove any descriptions of his work at Bungie from his website and instead replaced all that text with "gone fishing." Paul Tassi from Forbes reached out to him to see if he could get any sort of insight as to what might have happened. This is the email that he got from Michael. It doesn't really provide any additional context, but instead, Michael expresses gratitude for the time he did have at Bungie. He says right here, "The last 24 hours have been crazy and I'm still sorting through my feelings. Many of my good friends were also let go and I feel awful for them." Now he says here, also let go, suggesting that he himself was let go, likely insinuating that Michael did not voluntarily retire. I mean, it's heartbreaking enough to see so many Bungie employees getting laid off when it was leadership who made the mistakes and didn't heed the warnings and signs that had Destiny 2 gone the downhill slope that it did. But to see someone like Michael getting laid off, I mean, this has really stunned the Bungie community. To see the kinds of people who are getting laid off is kind of insane. And it's making people wonder, what the hell is Bungie doing or thinking? You know who else was laid off? Another veteran, Lorraine McLeese. Absolutely freaking shameless, says this Twitter user. Zero respect for the people who made and continue to make your studio what it is. So Lorraine is one of the most veteran Bungie developers. She was with them for over 2 decades and was responsible for literally designing the Halo logo. Now, getting into the nitty-gritty of the layoff situation, Paul Tassi added additional context as to what's been going on and how the layoffs are handled. So these are 3 bullet points worth highlighting here. The layoff decisions came directly from Bungie management, not Sony. This is not about Sony replacing Bungie employees with their own people. Many employee benefits, though not health insurance, only last until the end of the month if you're let go, and they conveniently laid people off on the 30th, which means a single additional day of coverage. And then finally, many employees had invested shares as a result of the Sony purchase. These shares will be received based on staying with the company for a certain number of years following the sale, but those shares revert to Bungie if you leave, including if you're laid off or fired, which is what's happening now to many of those affected, meaning they lost their share of the company. Now, Paul did clarify that this is not completely unrelated to Sony, as this is part of wider cost-cutting measures on the part of Sony, but in terms of how the layoffs are handled and the scale of the layoffs and the timing and the terms, that is Bungie's decision. So the awful handling of these layoffs can be squarely put on Bungie leadership. Further details surrounding the circumstances of this round of layoffs was relayed by Jason Schreier via Twitter and through Bloomberg. This is a tweet right here that reads, Bungie laid off 8% of staff on Monday, or around 100 people, sources tell Bloomberg. 2 weeks ago, staff were told they were projected to miss revenue targets by 45%, and this right here is a big part of why Bungie cut such a significant part of their workforce. Here's the Bloomberg article. Revenue was running 45% below projections for the year. That is a huge miss, and it highlights just how negatively the latest expansion for Destiny 2, Lightfall, impacted Destiny 2. This was an expansion so poorly received that player engagement just significantly fell off, which contributed to revenue being 45% below projections. The community and player base are more frustrated than they've ever been at Bungie and at Destiny 2. And we can see the results now. The end result is that people are spending significantly less time and money on Destiny 2. as its quality continues to degrade and as its monetization becomes far too egregious. Which is in part why the next expansion, the final shape, has been delayed. Bungie now is realizing, oh, we have to make this good. And while it was getting good reception, it was not getting great feedback. And so management told those present that they planned to push back the release to June 2024 from February to give developers additional time to improve the quality of this expansion and to make it the best it can be, as there's a lot riding on this expansion's success. So as of right now, according to this IGN report, pre-order numbers for the final shape are lower than expected. I'll get to this in a bit. So yeah, players are a lot more cautious now about purchasing expansions, and they're likely waiting to see what the reception surrounding it is like before they pull the trigger on it. Now, as I mentioned previously, it's not just the layoffs that's bad, but also the way Bungie handled the layoffs. Parsons, for example, the president of Bungie, or the CEO of Bungie, assured staff that amidst lower than projected revenue, he'd be cutting costs in other areas like travel, as well as implementing salary and hiring freezes. He made it seem as though protecting employees' jobs was a priority, that everyone would have to work together to weather the storm, he said. But then, out of the blue, on Monday morning, the news got worse. Dozens of staffers woke up to mysterious 15-minute meetings that had been placed on their calendars, which they soon learned were part of a mass layoff. Bungie laid off around 8% of its employees. Again, no heads up whatsoever. Just on the day of, people woke up to realize they had no jobs. Laid off employees will get some support in the form of 3 months of severance and 3 months of Bungie paid Cobra health insurance, although other benefits such as expense reimbursements ended Monday, sending some staff racing to submit their receipts. The timing of laying off employees on the 30th rather than on the 1st to be able to cut on providing benefits, that was very much intentional and incredibly scummy. On top of the fact that many laid off employees will be losing any shares that were invested as of next month. IGN also did their own investigation in an article titled Bungie CEO Claims Layoffs Were Due to Destiny 2 Underperformance. Again, a combination of revenue falling 45% below projections and pre-orders surrounding the final shape being lower than expected, which is a sign that players are starting to get fed up with the way Destiny 2 is being handled. And I'll emphasize this is not the fault of developers, because the developers have been begging leadership for necessary changes to win players back, but that feedback went unheard. The developers have been listening, but they just couldn't get across to leadership. The developers have been expressing that Destiny 2 player sentiment was at an all-time low, and to win players back, to have revenues go back up, and to get higher pre-order numbers for future expansions and the like, they have to start winning players back. It's the employees who knew what they were doing, who warned leadership, who get to become scapegoats for leadership failure. It is just so fucked that the developers and employees are the ones who are taking the fall for leadership and management fuck-ups. Especially when, as a Bungie employee recalled when speaking to IGN, employees were repeatedly assured following the 2022 Sony acquisition of Bungie that there would be no layoffs. The layoffs are especially insulting when you consider that Bungie recently spent a whole lot of money completing work on a brand new headquarters more than double the size of its previous office, which now feels like a complete waste when you're laying off employees instead of hiring more people. Money that could have gone saving jobs instead of this, what feels like a vanity project now. IGN also laid out the scope of what departments within Bungie were affected by the layoffs: community team, art, engineering, recruiting, legal, audio, QA, creative studios, and IT. And this is across both Destiny 2 and Marathon teams, not just strictly Destiny 2. Here's a former Bungie employee impacted by layoffs who put it very aptly: "It's definitely weird, I'd say infuriating, being the one who is laid off based off the decisions and performances of people and departments you're not involved with. Being deemed expendable hurts." And then adding insult to injury is the way Bungie continued to assure employees that if layoffs were happening, they would be very transparent about it. So this right here is from an email that the head of QA sent to staff members after staff began to notice that there have been a significant number of departures over time throughout the course of the last few weeks and the like. It was claimed in this email sent by the head of QA that these recent dismissals were not layoffs and not a result of cost cutting in any way, adding that if we ever did layoffs, we would be very upfront about it. So it's not even that they were quiet about the impending layoffs, they were actively deceptive about it. They provided a false sense of security. With Destiny 2 having been brought to its lowest point, especially after the launch of the poorly received Lightfall, a lot of people were like, the developers aren't listening, but now they're realizing, damn, the developers have been listening. It's just leadership weren't listening to the developers who were listening to the community. And so, a lot of people are suddenly getting sort of the fuller picture of what's been going on behind the scenes and why the game turned out to be in the state that it currently is in. Leadership failure, which is what often tends to be the case. Sentiments have also been expressed surrounding how much revenue projections were missed by Paul Tassi here. Tweeted, "I don't know how you turn around a 45% revenue miss anytime remotely soon in the current climate. Seriously concerning, from the current economic conditions to the fact that there are more amazing games than ever to play, especially in 2023, which has been such a good year for games." Yeah, I would agree with this. You don't monetize your way out of it. You have to bring players back, plain and simple. Currently, an incredibly tall order will be further attrition after final shape delay. There's got to be a major pivot for Destiny 2 to regain player trust and sentiment. Bungie's approach has been to make monetization more and more aggressive, and there's only so far that can take you. The number one thing that will sustain you ultimately is the loyalty of your community, and that has been consistently tested. And unless you win that loyalty back, Bungie, by showing some semblance of goodwill and by respecting the community and by listening to their requests and by understanding where Destiny 2 is currently failing, without that loyalty, without the players actually playing the game, no amount of aggressive monetization is going to save you. That's not what's going to bring the money if the players aren't there to spend. And by the way, reports of layoffs didn't end on October 30th. On November 1st, we started to see even more people coming out about their situation surrounding these layoffs. Paul Tassi here retweeted one, and he said, "Wait, Bungie layoffs are still happening? Maybe this did happen on the 30th, and it's only being talked about now, but regardless, sentiments continue to be expressed." And I mean, this individual is just so fed up that they are leaving the games industry and never looking back, which honestly is probably for the best for your mental health and for your sanity and for job security. And this kind of complete departure from the games industry is something that we'll continue to see happen from veteran developers, from valuable talent, unless some major positive changes happen in this industry. Like, we're losing way more quality of talent than we're gaining, and more people, as they become privy to the games industry's just poor treatment of employees, maybe they had initial, ambitions to become a part of this industry, but are slowly kind of going, I don't know, maybe I'll look towards other sectors. More and more people are learning how potentially risky and miserable the games industry can be, and that their love for games may not be worth that level of just shitty conditions. Here's one more major article I'd like to take a look at before closing out this video. Here is Paul Tassi from Forbes in an article titled "The Bungie and Destiny 2 Situation Gets Worse Per New Information," that provides additional context and insight into just how poorly these layoffs were handled, using information that he gathered from his own sources as well as corroboration from IGN and Bloomberg. He learned that a wider Sony ask for spending cuts resulted in Bungie deciding on a large number of layoffs, with them deciding who was laid off and how that process unfolded, going back on what was said a year and a half ago that the acquisition would not mean layoffs. Employees found themselves locked out of all their accounts, systems, email before many knew they had even been laid off. Others had short meetings in which they were told they were fired, and these were meetings that were arranged last minute without warning, but also not to tell anyone about it. Bungie tried to keep it all secret and engage in subterfuge. Others found out the layoffs were happening on Twitter, which is utterly insane. They did not learn about the layoffs until they saw it on social media. Employees were often not allowed to say goodbye to other team members or exchange contact information, which had to be done after the fact. Many team/line managers had no idea who was being cut from their teams until it happened. Some teams only lost a few people, others were decimated. I mean, just like the most fucked up and inhumane way you could lay off employees. The company purposely tried to internally hide just how many people had been fired. Only outside reporting after the fact came up with the roughly 100 number. Some employee benefits expire at the end of the month, meaning being fired on the 30th means just a single day of additional coverage for those benefits. Many employees had invested shares as a result of Sony deal that mandated they stayed with the company a number of years afterward to collect. That is null if you leave or are laid off. Many employees just involuntarily lost their shares to the company that fired them. Some of those details are recapping what's already been said, but this is just like a nice summary to get a good, broad, kind of zoomed out bird's eye view of how awful this all is. And then to cap it off, given that Bungie is a part of PlayStation, this is going to have an effect on Sony and PlayStation as a company. And well, before the layoffs even happened, back on October 1st, 2023, Forbes reported that insiders say PlayStation's live service pivot may not be going so well. The recent announcements of multiple live service games in development were received tepidly. The Last of Us multiplayer live service situation is not great right now, with the development of that project either being on hold or just being rebooted or being adjusted on some level. That's not going as smoothly as Naughty Dog would like, especially after Bungie came in and evaluated their live service and they said this is not good enough. And now Bungie itself is sort of being gutted and its projections are not being met. Community sentiments, loyalty, engagement, and spending for Destiny 2 is at an all-time low. Pre-orders for the upcoming expansion. I mean, this is about the lowest point you can be at if you're Bungie. This feels like kind of like rock bottom for them, or at least the most rock bottom we have seen them in a long time. And yeah, this is not going to do Sony and PlayStation any favors when it comes to their big push to try to do more live services. The future of Bungie right now, ladies and gentlemen, is very uncertain. Marathon really has to pop off. The Destiny 2 expansion, the final shape, that has to do really well. And, right now, signs are not looking great. We'll see if they can somehow turn things around. But even if they do, there's no denying that Bungie leadership just utterly failed their employees with the recent round of layoffs and the way those layoffs happened and the way they didn't listen to their developers, their advice and their feedback, and in the way that they allowed the developers to take the fall instead of the leadership who perpetuated this situation in the first place. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is everything you need to know about what's going on at Bungie, and as new developments continue to happen, I'll keep you updated. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole Bungie situation and what you think the future holds for Bungie, and whether you think that this is something Bungie can weather or whether this is indication of some kind of downfall. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.